Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I'm doing my August wrap-up. So these are all the books that I read in August. August was a really good reading month for me, both because I read a lot of books, more than I was expecting to. I read 12 books. 2 of them were graphic novels, but still, 12 things. And then also, I really liked a lot of the books that I was reading, which I'm very excited about because in a previous video, I had talked about how I have not been super excited about a lot of the books that I had been reading recently, and I have some things I was trying to do to make my reading more enjoyable, and I feel like they're working because I really liked so many of the books that I read in August. So let's get started. So the first book that I read in August was The Harp of Kings by Juliet Marillier. I started this in July and then finished it right at the beginning of August. This is an ARC that was sent to me by the publisher, so thank you very much to them for sending it. And I really enjoyed this book. This is the first one in Juliet Marillier's new series that is called The Warrior Bards. This came out September 3rd, so it should already be out by now if you're interested in reading it. But this takes place in the same world as the Seven Waters series and the Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy, but we're following all new characters. We're following 3 young warriors who are all training and vying to join the elite warriors of Swan Island when they're given a special mission that requires them to go undercover as musicians and find the Harp of Kings, which is a very special harp that is used for the coronation ceremony in a local or a nearby kingdom. And of course, because it is a Juliet Marillier book, there's also the hand of the uncanny and the fair folk in the story. It has her beautiful writing, of course. I have a full review for this that I will link below if you want full thoughts on this book, but overall I really enjoyed it. I do think that there's kind of room for some development in the story and the characters, but it's the first book in the series, so I feel like the things that I kind of feel like could have been more fleshed out are going to be in future books in this, so I'm looking forward to that. And I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I listened to the audiobook of Quiet by Susan Cain. This is a nonfiction book that most people have probably heard of because it was a very popular book for a while, and I guess it's still pretty popular, but it's specifically about being an introvert. The subtitle for this actually is The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And so this one really focuses on how introversion functions and how it's perceived in our society, how especially in American culture we very much value extroversion over introversion and try to teach people to be more extroverted. And I thought this one definitely had some interesting points. There were a few parts of the book that got kind of repetitive where it felt like she was making a point but making it over and over again and just citing slightly different research. But also, one of the things that I liked about this was that there was a lot of research that she references to back up all of this information. It talked about how kind of the history of personality and the concept of personality, how we've shifted from a society of character to a society of personality, which is more about how you project yourself to others. 2 of the concepts that I thought were most interesting in this were free trait theory and self-monitoring. So free trait theory is essentially the idea that people have a core personality, but then we can change our behavior in different situations based on the context. So there are these free traits that are more malleable and can change from situation to situation, but that doesn't mean that our personality isn't, we don't have a core personality of who we are, which is a concept that I've thought about before, but I didn't know there was a name for that idea. So I thought that was really helpful. The other concept that I thought was interesting was self-monitoring. So the idea is that there are people who are high self-monitors and people who are low self-monitors, and then of course people in the middle. And being a high self-monitor means that you observe yourself in different situations. You take context cues from the environment and from other people to determine how you behave and adapt your own behavior based on your observations of yourself and your environment and on those context cues. And then being low self-monitoring means that those are people who maybe observe themselves less closely and are more consistent across situations. That is also a concept I've kind of thought about before, but I liked that they explained it very concisely. There's an actual like theory that goes along with it, and there's like a little test that you could do that could kind of help to determine if you're higher or lower in self-monitoring. I came out being high in self-monitoring, which makes sense because I do very much observe myself in different situations and adapt based on my environment and the context. So I thought those were some of the most interesting concepts in the book. I enjoyed this. I didn't think it was like incredible or mind-blowing, but it was good. Then I read a book of poetry, which was Don't Tell Me Not to Ask Why by Samantha King Holmes. And this one I really enjoyed actually because I felt like it covered a lot of similar topics to a lot of other poetry that I've read, that it talks a lot about, you know, toxic relationships, valuing yourself, especially in romantic relationships, but also familial relationships. It covered a lot of like common topics that I've seen in a lot of modern poetry, but I like her style a lot because I felt like it used more imagery, it felt more personal, and I just really enjoyed her writing. Next, I read a graphic novel, which is kind of unusual for me because I'm not a big graphic novel person, but I read The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Wang, and this is a very popular graphic novel, and it's really very cute, and I can see why people like it so much. It's about a prince who likes to wear dresses, and he befriends a dressmaker who can make dresses for him and make these beautiful, elaborate dresses, but also keep his secret because he is keeping this part of his life secret from the rest of his family and the rest of the world. And it's about the two of them and their friendship and finding themselves and like finding acceptance and all of that, and it was very sweet graphic novel. So then the next few books that I have are actually part of a readathon that I was participating in, which is the Femme Fatale readathon, and I have not been participating in a lot of readathons this year, but this one seemed like a really good one to do because it's all about reading fantasy written by women. So that is pretty much most of my reading anyways. Most of the books that I read are fantasy written by female authors, so it just seemed like it would be a really good, easy one to participate in. So the first one that I finished for this readathon is The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill, and this is a graphic novel also which has been making the rounds on BookTube, and like so many people have been raving about it, and that's part of why I really wanted to pick it up because it is so cute. It is about this magical world where there are these tiny little dragons who grow tea leaves on their horns, and you can harvest the tea leaves without hurting the dragons and make tea, and it's just like the cutest, and it's about like caring for these dragons and the magical properties of their tea and like the community around the tea and the tea dragons, and it's just like, it's so cute. It also has like a little thing in the back about how to care for different tea dragons and like pictures of the different tea dragons. Like, it's just the most adorable. I feel like, so it seems to me in this that you get paired with a tea dragon that like matches your personality, in which case I feel like I would probably end up being matched with the Earl Grey tea dragon, which I'm okay with because I like Earl Grey. So that would be this guy right here. But if I was going to choose a tea dragon, I feel like I would like the ginger tea dragon because it just seems like so sweet. They describe it as being very sensitive, and I'm just like, that sounds adorable. But I also just felt like I had to get this book because this is the kind of book that as a kid, I would have like killed for a book like this. I would have loved this story. I would have loved this art style. I love that there's a little like care guide in the back, and there are different descriptions of the dragons. Like, this would have been exactly the kind of thing I loved as a kid. And so I was just like, oh, I had to get this. I mean, I loved it as an adult now, but I would have like died over this as a kid. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. It was just super, super cute. And I think there's a sequel coming out soon, which I really want to read. The next book that I read was Ink Spell by Cornelia Funk. So this one I actually listened to the audiobook, but I have the physical book here. So this is a middle grade. It is the sequel to Inkheart, which I read earlier this year. And this one, not to go too much into the story since it is a sequel, but we're again following Maggie and Mo, who are able to read things out of books. So when they read out loud, they can bring characters and objects out of a book that they are reading. But in this one, we get to travel to one of these magical book worlds and learn more about that world and how their abilities function while they are in a story, which was interesting. And this one, I don't have a lot of like in-depth thoughts about it, but I did enjoy it. It's not one that really like got me thinking and had me like really opinionated about it, but like I had a fun time reading it. I enjoyed the story, I enjoyed the characters and seeing this world and this magic and all of that. So like I just had a really fun time with it, and I gave this one like 3.75, maybe 4 out of 5 stars. Then I have Fool's Errand by Robin Hobb, and so this one is the first book in the Tawny Man trilogy, which is the 3rd trilogy in the Realm of the Elderling series. And actually both this one and Inkspell were like maybe kind of cheating for counting as part of the readathon, because I had already read like a large chunk of both of those books before the readathon started, so I just like finished these during the readathon, but like we're counting them anyway. But as I said, so this is a Robin Hobb book in the Realm of the Elderlings. We're back to following Fitz and the Fool, and this one I really enjoyed actually most of the book. I didn't love the ending because I felt like the ending was a little bit too tidy and it didn't match the rest of the story, which is a complaint that I've had about a lot of Robin Hobb's books. But overall, I enjoyed this. I felt like this story had 3 very distinct parts. The first third of this book was my favorite because it was just not even the plot. The first 200 pages of this book, not the plot. It was just like recap, and then we just get to know a lot about the characters' lives, and that was my favorite part of this, because I really read Robin Hobb's books for her writing. I really like her writing, I like her world, I like her characters, I don't really like her plots. And so the part of the book that had the least plot was my favorite part. But I will have a full review of this coming out very soon, so keep an eye out for that if you want more like in-depth thoughts about this book. But I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because, as I said, I really like her writing and worlds, and I enjoyed at least 2/3 of this book. Then I read another book of poetry, which is The Lioness Awakens by Lauren Eden. This is another one that I feel like I really liked because it seemed to tackle similar topics to a lot of poetry, but it had more like imagery and it felt more like visceral than a lot of other poetry that I've been reading, and so I liked that about this one as well. Next, I listened to the audiobook of Tithe by Holly Black. This is the first book in her modern fairy tales trilogy, and I think this is her first book, and so it was really interesting to get to see what her first book and her first fairy book was like. Also, I buddy read this with Allie from Allie Corvere. I'll link her channel below. You should definitely check it out if you have not already. And it was really fun to buddy read this. It was one book that if I hadn't been buddy reading it, I may not have gotten through it because it was not the best written book, but it was really fun to just kind of like gripe about it together, and that it was one of the books that's almost so bad it's good. It was very like quintessential like early 2000s YA fantasy. Our main character Kay is very angsty. Holly Black puts a lot of work into making sure you know that like Kay is tough, she's gritty, she smokes cigarettes, like her mom is a mess and she has to take care of her mom. But in the story, Kay saves the life of a fairy. At the time, she doesn't totally understand what she's doing, but the fairy becomes indebted to her because of her saving his life, and then she gets drawn into the world of fairies and finds out a lot of secrets. And as I said in the story, she's so angsty, and she's definitely a early 2000s protagonist kind of character. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not a favorite kind of character for me. But also I did feel like she like made so many stupid decisions. There were so many times where I was like, let me just make a list of like the 20 bad ideas, bad decisions that she has made. Like, there were so many things that just didn't make sense. Also things that I felt like didn't make sense in the plot, especially around the ending and the way that things kind of like shook out at the end. I had a lot of questions, a lot of stuff that just like made no sense, just like logically in the story. It also had a trope that I don't like and I've talked about before, which is the romance trope where you have one of the characters is way older and like maybe like 100 or thousands of years older, and then the younger character who's like actually young. So in this case, there is Kay, who's like 15 or 16, and then we have the love interest who is a fairy who is like hundreds of years old. I hate that trope, and so I was just like, why is this necessary? But again, that's a trope that happens pretty frequently, but I think was especially common in early 2000s fantasy. So this was a book that I very much felt was a book of its time, and I gave it 3 stars. I don't know if it necessarily warrants 3 stars. It may be more like 2 stars, but like it gets 3 stars because it was fun. I enjoyed it, whether it was good or not. I'm kind of going back and forth though about whether I'm going to actually finish the series. Then I listened to another audiobook, which was Beautiful by Juliet Marillier. So this is another new release by Juliet Marillier that came out earlier this year. So this is one I think hasn't been like talked about as much. So she wrote a short story that was a retelling of East of the Sun, West of the Moon, and then developed that into a full novel, which is only available as an audiobook on Audible. And I specifically got the Audible free trial so that I could listen to this one book. I kind of wish that there was an option to get a physical book of it, because I would love to have it to like have on my shelf, but I did think that this worked well as an audiobook. But as I said, this is a retelling of the fairy tale East of the Sun, West of the Moon, but this fairy tale or this retelling is told from a different perspective. So usually we're following the girl who is trying to save the love of her life from being forced to marry a troll. And in this book, we're actually following the trolls. So we're following a troll princess, and she is unaware of the curse that has been placed on the man who is being forced to marry her, who had been turned into a bear and all of that. So the first part of this story is East of the Sun, West of the Moon from the perspective of this troll princess. But that's really only the beginning of the story. After that, we move on and start a new story beyond the fairy tale retelling as we're following this troll princess, and she sets off on an adventure to find herself, to find out more about her kingdom and her people, and how she will be, like what kind of ruler will she be in this world, because she's been kept very isolated and very naive. But I liked her character. She, even though she didn't have a lot of knowledge of the world, she still had like ideas of what kind of person she wanted to be. Even though this moves beyond just the fairy tale retelling, the rest of the story still has very much a fairy tale feel to it, which I really liked, and I think that kept it like moving along pretty well. I will have a more in-depth review for this coming up, so keep an eye out for that also. But overall, I really enjoyed this and I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I listened to the audiobook Forest Bathing: How Trees Can Help You Find Health and Happiness by Ching Li. This is also one I've been meaning to read for a long time. So this is a non-fiction book about forest bathing. Forest bathing is a practice of going out in nature, especially in forests, and like bathing in the experience of being in a forest and being with trees. And a lot of the activities or practices of it are very similar to like mindfulness practices, but just kind of practicing mindfulness in nature. Because when you are doing this, it's not like you're going on a hike, you're not really going anywhere or trying to achieve anything in particular. You usually move very slowly and are trying to really observe your surroundings and really be in the experience fully of being in the forest, and using your senses, really noticing how the air smells and how the temperature feels. And the book talks about how forest bathing can affect your mental state, your happiness, your like mental health and all of that, how it affects your physical health, and it just was really interesting. And forest bathing is something that I've always thought was a really interesting idea. I feel like this is one that I may have to read again at some point because I don't feel like I fully retained like all of the information, and I really would like to. One of the pieces of information that I did hold on to that I thought was interesting is that forest bathing can boost your immune system and actually make you like physically healthier with effects that last up to like 30 days. So even if you went forest bathing like once a month, you could have a way better immune system. And I just thought that was so cool. And the last book that I read in August was Middlegame by Shauna McGuire. I loved this book. This is going to be in my like favorite books of the year, I am sure. So this is a book that's very difficult to explain. It is sci fantasy. It is a blend of science fiction and fantasy. It has alchemy. The basic premise of this, if I can call it basic, is that there's an alchemist who is trying to harness the forces of the universe and the secrets of the universe to give himself essentially godlike powers so that he can kind of take over the world. And he has all of these different like alchemy strategies to do this, and his main like experiment is to use sets of twins to embody different like basic forces of the universe. So our main characters are Roger and Dodger, who are one of these sets of twins. One of them is the embodiment of all language, one of them is the embodiment of all math, and the two of them balance each other. And so the story has like the one level where it is about this larger scheme of like taking over like the powers of the universe. And then it also has this level to the story that's just about this brother and sister who are separated at birth and how they find each other over and over again throughout their lives and their connection to each other. And I loved this. It was so good. It was so confusing. My basic like feeling while reading with this was just like, I am confusion. Like I did not know what was going on a good like majority of the time, but like I was confused in like the best way. I've said before that there are some books that like don't get the balance between giving you enough information and like withholding the right amount of information, and this one I think just had the perfect balance of that. I was engaged the whole time. This is a book that you really have to focus and pay attention and read carefully the whole way through. Also, this one really made me appreciate Shauna McGuire's writing. I've read The Wayward Children by her, which I really enjoy, but this book is just so much better and it really made me like really appreciate her writing and her writing style. She's such a specific voice and way of telling a story. But I would put content warnings on this because it does get very dark. I would put warnings for suicide and self-harm, as well as violence, because there's a lot of murdering people and then using their body parts for alchemy. Which is not, it doesn't get excessively graphic, but I could definitely see that being disturbing for some people, so I'd say keep that in mind. But this book was so good. It was very dark and very confusing, but like just so good and so well done, and I absolutely loved it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Obviously. And I've already filmed a full review for this, and it will be coming out very soon, so you can keep an eye out for that one too. And finally, this month I had one DNF, which was Heart of the Fae by Emma Hamm, and I'm not going to go into it right now because I'm sure this video is already incredibly long, but I'm going to be doing a video about the DNFs the books that I DNF'd over the summer, so I'll talk about it more in that video if you would like to know why I DNF'd this. So those are all of the books that I read in August. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!